What would you do if the love of your life abandoned you at the altar, leaving you to raise 4 children alone? In this heart-wrenching story, Nina Harper, a driven young attorney, is moments away from her dream wedding when her fiancé, David Evans, mysteriously vanishes. With a broken heart, Nina is forced to pick up the pieces of her life, only to discover she's pregnant with quadruplets. For 3 years, Nina raises her 4 sons on her own, building a life filled with strength and determination. But just as she begins to find her footing, David reappears, determined to be part of their lives. What follows is a roller coaster of emotions, betrayal, forgiveness, redemption, and the challenge of healing past wounds. Will Nina allow David back into her world, or is the damage too deep to repair? Stick around as we dive into Nina's journey of resilience, love, and family. You won't want to miss the twists and turns that will keep you on the edge of your seat. If you're ready for an emotional ride, be sure to subscribe to our channel, hit the like button, and drop a comment below. Let us know how you think Nina should handle David's return. Will love conquer all, or are some wounds too deep to heal? Now let's jump into the story. Nina Harper stood frozen at the doors of St. Andrew's Chapel, the murmur of the waiting guests a faint hum in the background. Her hands, trembling slightly, smoothed down the front of her ivory gown. The beading sparkled under the soft light, and the intricate lace draped perfectly over her figure, as if it were made just for her. This was supposed to be the happiest day of her life, the day she'd marry David Evans, the man who had swept her off her feet. At 28, Nina had overcome so many obstacles, being raised by a single mother on the south side of Chicago, navigating the rough streets and defying every stereotype to graduate at the top of her class from Harvard Law. She had earned this day, earned her place in this world, but something felt off. Her heart raced as the string quartet began to play Pachelbel's canon, signaling the moment she had dreamed about since she was a little girl. She closed her eyes, trying to focus on the life she was about to start with David. David, the heir to the Evans real estate empire, was everything she had wanted. Or at least she thought he was. They had met at a high-profile charity gala 2 years ago, and despite the stark differences in their backgrounds, they connected. He was different from the men in her world. He didn't flinch when people looked at them, a black woman and a white man, arm in arm at events. His friends and family, though, weren't as open-minded. There had always been whispers, the disapproving glances from his mother, Margaret Evans, and the quiet but unmistakable discomfort when Nina entered their elite world. But David had promised her that none of that mattered. He had chosen her, and they were supposed to be in this together. As the chapel doors swung open, Nina's heart stopped. David wasn't standing at the altar. Her eyes searched for him down the long aisle. Rows of impeccably dressed guests turned to watch her, their curious glances slowly turning into confused whispers. Her breath caught in her throat, the beautiful dream teetering on the edge of collapse. "Where's David?" she muttered under her breath. From the front row, Margaret Evans rose gracefully from her seat. Her expression, as always, was a perfect mix of condescension and icy politeness. She moved toward Nina, her tall, thin frame gliding effortlessly across the floor. As she approached, she extended a hand, and in it was a neatly folded note. Nina stared at it, her stomach churning. "What is this?" she whispered, her voice shaky. Margaret's cold blue eyes held no emotion as she said, "You should read this in private, dear." Nina took the note with trembling fingers. The world tilted as she unfolded it, and she had to blink to focus on David's messy handwriting. "I'm sorry. I thought I was strong enough, but I can't go through with this. You deserve better, David." Nina swayed, her grip tightening on the note as her heart shattered into a million pieces. The murmurs grew louder, the guests sensing that something was terribly wrong. She fought the overwhelming urge to collapse, her body threatening to give way under the weight of David's betrayal. Margaret's voice broke through the fog of shock. "Please, no scene, Nina. The guests will be handled. You should leave quietly through the side door. I'm sure you understand?" "Understand," Nina wanted to scream. Her pulse raced with anger, and for a moment, the sorrow was replaced with a fire so hot she thought it might consume her. She squared her shoulders and met Margaret's gaze. I understand perfectly, she said through gritted teeth. Your son is a coward, and you raised him to be one. Gasps erupted from the guests, and Margaret's calm demeanor faltered ever so slightly. But Nina didn't care. The anger drove her forward, pushing back the tears that threatened to spill. She turned to face the crowd. I apologize for the inconvenience, she said, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. There will be no wedding today. Feel free to enjoy the reception. I'm sure the Evans family can afford it. With that, Nina walked back down the aisle, her head held high. The whispers followed her, but she ignored them. She had nothing left to prove to these people. Outside the chapel, the crisp autumn air hit her face like a slap, grounding her in the reality of the moment. She was alone. Her fairy tale had just crumbled to dust. Nina's heels clicked against the cobblestone as she walked out into the street, the weight of what had just happened pressing down on her like an anchor. Her chest heaved with every breath, and for the first time since she had walked into that chapel, tears burned her eyes. Nina, a voice called out. She turned to see her best friend, Samantha Taylor, rushing down the steps toward her. He had been in situations far worse than this during his career, but something about today's encounter was different. She was the only person Nina could count on now. As soon as Sam reached her, Nina collapsed into her arms, the sobs that she had held back in the chapel breaking free. He left, she choked out. He didn't show up. Sam's arms tightened around her. Oh my God, Nina, I'm so sorry. What a bastard. He never deserved you. The words provided little comfort. Nothing could ease the pain ripping through Nina's chest. Nina pulled back from Sam's embrace, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. I don't know what to do, she said, her voice trembling. How am I supposed to face everyone? My firm, they're all going to know. Sam gently placed a hand on her shoulder. Screw them! You don't owe anyone an explanation. David is the one who should be ashamed, not you. Nina took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. But the reality of what had just happened, the public humiliation, the loss of the future she had envisioned with David, was overwhelming. She had spent her whole life proving people wrong, breaking through barriers. And now she had been reduced to this. A jilted bride. I need to get out of here, Nina whispered, her voice barely audible. Let's get you home, Sam said, wrapping an arm around her and leading her toward the waiting limo. As they settled into the back seat, Nina leaned her head against the window, the cold glass soothing against her overheated skin. The city blurred past her, and all she could think was, how could I have been so blind? The limo wound through the streets of Chicago, and Nina couldn't shake the feeling that she had missed something, some sign that David wasn't truly committed to her. She had attributed the awkward silences from his friends and the stiff smiles from his family to discomfort with their interracial relationship. She had believed love would conquer all, but love wasn't enough. 3 weeks had passed since that day at the chapel. Nina had returned to work at her law firm, burying herself in case after case, trying to block out the whispers that followed her down the hall. She refused to let them see how broken she was, but inside, she felt like a hollow shell. It was late one Friday night when Nina felt the first wave of nausea. She had brushed it off as stress, thinking it was just the strain of the long hours she'd been putting in. But as the days went by, the nausea persisted, and she started to feel more tired than usual. One morning, she couldn't shake the thought that something was wrong. Sitting in the bathroom of her apartment, Nina stared at the little plastic stick in her trembling hand. 2 pink lines appeared, and her breath caught in her throat. Her heart pounded in her ears as the reality of the situation sank in. Pregnant? Nina's vision blurred as she sank onto the cold tile floor, her mind spinning. How could this be happening? They had been careful, or at least she thought they had. But then she remembered their last night together, the night before the wedding, when David had seemed so passionate, so sure of their future. Had he known then that he was going to leave her? Nina placed a hand over her still flat stomach, her emotions a whirlwind of fear and something else, something fierce and protective. A baby. David's baby. She knew she should tell him, but the thought of facing him, of hearing his apologies, made her sick all over again. No, this was her child. She would face this on her own terms. Nina stood, her reflection in the mirror looking back at her with a new sense of purpose. Whatever happened next, she would be ready. Over the next few months, Nina's life became a blur of morning sickness, late-night legal briefs, and secret doctor's appointments. She kept the pregnancy quiet, not wanting to deal with the inevitable questions and whispers from her colleagues. Only Sam knew, and she was a lifeline, helping Nina navigate this new reality. At her 12-week ultrasound, Nina sat in stunned silence as the doctor delivered the news. 4 heartbeats. Nina blinked, her brain struggling to process the words. "Excuse me?" The doctor smiled kindly. "You're carrying quadruplets." "Quadruplets. 4 babies." Nina laughed, the sound hysterical and teary as it echoed through the room. Of course! Why would the universe give her anything less than the most complicated path forward? As she left the appointment, a new resolve settled over her. 4 babies. It was insane, but Nina knew she would make it work. She always had. She had fought for everything she had ever achieved: her education, her career, her place in a world that didn't always want her. And now she would fight for these babies too. They would have every opportunity. She would make sure of it. Nina waddled through the wide, echoing corridors of her law firm, her hands cradling her now 7-month pregnant belly. Her once trim figure was now a distant memory, and her swollen feet ached with every step. She had expected stares, and she got them, some filled with sympathy, others with thinly veiled judgment. It wasn't easy being an unmarried pregnant woman in a corporate world dominated by men, and worse, as a black woman. Nina had always worked twice as hard to be taken seriously, and now she had quadruple the motivation: her babies. She pushed open the door to the firm's largest conference room. The air inside felt thick with tension as the partners of Howard, Levinson Marsh turned to her, their expressions blank, but eyes scrutinizing every move she made. "Gentlemen," she began, keeping her voice steady despite her nerves, "I understand there are concerns about my ability to meet the demands of this job once the babies arrive. I've taken the liberty of preparing a plan that I believe will address all your concerns." Nina took a deep breath and handed out copies of a detailed work-life balance strategy she had been fine-tuning for weeks. For the next hour, she presented her case meticulously, outlining how she would manage her workload, meet court deadlines, and still care for her quadruplets. She had researched the firm's competition, showing how their support of her family situation could set a new standard and attract top talent. Silence followed her presentation. She could feel the weight of the room pressing down on her, waiting for someone to break it. Finally, the managing partner, Stephen Levinson, spoke up, his voice gruff, but with a note of respect. "Impressive as always, Nina. We'd be fools to lose you. Let's work out the details." Relief flooded her as she left the conference room, but it was bittersweet. She had won this battle, but the war was far from over. There would be more challenges ahead, and the weight of expectations felt heavier every day. She had secured her place at the firm, but deep down, the fear of being judged as a failure, both as a mother and a lawyer, never left her. The day her water broke, Nina was in the middle of a deposition. She had felt off all morning, but she chalked it up to the usual discomfort of carrying 4 babies. Still, when she felt the sudden, unmistakable rush of liquid, her heart raced. Calmly excusing herself, Nina called Sam from the courthouse bathroom. "It's time," she whispered into the phone, gripping the edge of the sink to steady herself. "What now?" Sam's voice was frantic. "He'll be right there. Don't move." Nina laughed, despite the pain starting to creep into her lower back. "Trust me, I'm not going anywhere." By the time Sam arrived and they made it to the hospital, Nina's contractions were coming fast and hard. The next 18 hours were a blur of pain, exhaustion, and anxiety. She had never felt so vulnerable, so out of control, but she refused to let it show. She had to be strong for her babies. When it was finally over, Nina stared down at her 4 tiny sons in awe. Their perfect brown faces, each unique but undeniably connected, made her heart swell with a love so fierce it took her breath away. Ethan, Caleb, Noah, and Liam. They were hers. Her beautiful boys. Tears slipped down her cheeks as she whispered, "Mama's got you." As she drifted off to sleep, exhausted but exhilarated, She didn't notice the commotion in the hallway. She didn't see the man with pale skin and wide, stunned eyes burst through the hospital doors, his heart pounding in his chest. It had been 3 years since Nina had last seen David Evans. 3 years since he had left her standing at the altar, broken and humiliated. She had moved on, or so she thought. But when she stepped into Calf Boulevard one rainy afternoon with her boys in tow, her world tilted on its axis. David was there, seated by the window, a cup of coffee untouched before him. Their eyes locked, and for a moment, time froze. The bustling noise of the calf faded into the background, leaving only the sound of her racing heart. She hadn't prepared for this, hadn't prepared to see him. Not like this. "Nina!" His voice was soft, disbelieving. He stood slowly, his gaze flicking between her and the 4 identical boys squirming in their high chairs. The calf had gone eerily quiet. The other patrons seemed to sense the drama unfolding before them. Nina swallowed hard, forcing her voice to remain steady. "David." He took a hesitant step forward, his eyes still darting between the boys and her. "Are they—" He couldn't finish the question. "Yes," Nina replied simply, her expression cold and guarded. She began wiping down the boy's sticky hands, refusing to let him see the pain his presence dredged up. David's face paled. "Why didn't you tell me?" A bitter laugh escaped her lips, surprising even herself. "Tell you, you left me at the altar, David. You made it pretty clear you didn't want anything to do with me." His jaw clenched, a flush creeping up his neck. "I know I hurt you, but these are my sons. I have a right to know them." The anger that Nina had buried for years flared. She whipped her head around to face him, her voice low but dangerous. "You have no rights here. I've raised them alone for 3 years while you were off living your life. You don't get to walk in now and play daddy. If it isn't the old man." By now, the boys had picked up on the unease between the adults. Ethan began to whimper, setting off a chain reaction among his brothers. Nina's attention immediately shifted, her hands soothing the boys, her voice soft and calm. David watched in awe as she expertly calmed all 4 children. He had no idea what to say, no idea how to fix the mess he had made. "They're beautiful," he murmured after a long silence, his eyes filled with a longing that made Nina's heart clench despite herself. "Ethan, Caleb, Noah, and Liam," she said quietly, pointing to each child in turn. David smiled weakly. "The 4 E's," he mused. "Clever." Nina didn't smile. "We need to go," she said firmly, gathering the boys' things. "Nina, wait please," David pleaded, stepping closer. "I want to be part of their lives." She paused, her back to him. Her throat tightened as she spoke. "You lost that right when you left." Without another word, she maneuvered the boys out of the calf, leaving David standing alone, his heart heavy with regret. The letter arrived 2 weeks later. Certified. Nina's stomach dropped when she saw the law firm's logo on the envelope. She already knew what it was before she even opened it. David was requesting a paternity test and visitation rights. Sitting at her kitchen table, Nina stared at the letter, her mind racing. Her hands trembled as she read the words again and again, the fear rising like a tidal wave inside her. He wanted to be part of their lives now, after 3 years. She had worked so hard to build a stable life for her sons. The thought of David disrupting that stability filled her with dread. And worse, the thought of his mother, Margaret, with her thinly veiled racism, entering their world made her feel physically ill. Nina folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. Her mind was spinning with what to do next. She had always known there was a possibility David would resurface someday, but she hadn't prepared for the reality of it. A soft knock on the door startled her. Sam walked in, her usual confident stride slowing when she saw Nina's face. "What's wrong?" Sam asked, sitting across from her at the table. Nina handed her the letter without a word. Sam's eyes scanned the document quickly, her lips pressing into a thin line. "He's got some nerve," she muttered, tossing the letter back onto the table. "So now he decides he wants to play dad." Nina nodded, her throat tight. "What do I do? Sam, I don't want him or his family anywhere near my boys." "But he's their father." Sam sighed, leaning back in her chair. "It's complicated. You know the law. He has rights, but so do you. You've raised them alone for 3 years. If he really wants to be part of their lives, He's going to have to prove it. Nina clenched her fists, her resolve hardening. I'll fight him. For my boys, I'll fight. The legal proceedings moved faster than Nina expected. The paternity test confirmed what she already knew. The boys were David's. But the court process was grueling, each hearing filled with tension and bitterness. They knew the investigation wasn't just targeting him, it was threatening to expose a culture of corruption that had existed for years, and no one wanted to be caught in the crossfire. But as the months wore on, something unexpected happened. David started to show up. He came to the boys' doctor appointments, attended their school functions, and was there for every court-ordered visitation. He seemed genuinely committed, and Nina hated how much it made her rethink everything. She had been ready to see him as the villain, the man who abandoned her when she needed him most. But now, he was showing up for their sons in ways she never expected. One afternoon, after a particularly contentious court hearing, David pulled Nina aside. "I know I don't deserve it," he said, his voice quiet and sincere, "but I want to be here for them. For you." Nina's heart ached. She wanted to believe him, but the wounds from his abandonment still ran deep. She had spent the last 3 years building a life without him, protecting her sons from the pain of not having a father. And now, she was faced with the possibility of letting him back in. "I don't know if I can trust you," she whispered. David's eyes softened. "I know, but I'm going to prove it to you. To all of you." It had been 3 months since the court ruled that David would have supervised visitation with the boys. Nina had agreed, but with reservations. She still couldn't fully trust him. Despite his efforts to be there for his sons, the emotional walls she had built remained. But just as Nina was starting to think she could manage this new reality, everything fell apart. One evening, as she was getting the boys ready for bed, her phone buzzed with a message from Sam. "Turn on the news. Now." Nina frowned, her heart skipping a beat as she pulled up a news app. Her stomach dropped as the headline flashed across the screen. Evans heir's secret family revealed abandoned bride and 4 children spark scandal. The article was brutal. It detailed David's abandonment of Nina at the altar, the existence of their quadruplets, and even hinted at racial tensions within David's family as a possible reason for his initial disappearance. The comments were even worse, anonymous users attacking Nina, making thinly veiled racist remarks about her and her sons. Nina's hands shook as she scrolled through the article, her mind reeling. How had this gotten out? Who had leaked their story to the press? The Boyshire boys were being dragged into the public eye, something she had fought so hard to avoid. A soft voice pulled her from her spiraling thoughts. "Mama." Nina looked down to see Caleb, his big brown eyes full of concern. "Are you okay?" She forced a smile, crouching down to his level. "I'm okay, sweetie," she said, though her voice wavered. "Mama's just a little tired." Caleb nodded solemnly, accepting her answer without question. He wrapped his small arms around her neck, and for a moment, all the noise, the media, the scandal, the fear faded away. But it wouldn't stay gone for long. The next morning, as Nina was preparing breakfast for the boys, there was a knock at the door. Her heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected anyone. She opened the door to find David standing there, his face pale, the dark circles under his eyes more prominent than usual. "I'm so sorry," he said immediately, his voice low with guilt. "I didn't know the press would get involved. I never wanted this for you for the boys." Nina stared at him, her anger simmering just below the surface. "But it did happen, David. And now our sons are being dragged into something they don't even understand." David stepped closer, his eyes filled with regret. "I'll release a statement. I'll make this right." Nina shook her head, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. "And say what? Exactly? That you left me at the altar because your family couldn't handle you marrying a black woman, that you spent 3 years pretending we didn't exist." David flinched at her words, shame washing over him. "I was a coward," he admitted quietly. "I let my family's expectations, their prejudices, control me. But I've changed, Nina. I'm not that man anymore." Nina's heart ached. She wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that he had truly changed. But the fear of trusting him again was too strong. She crossed her arms, her voice hard. "This isn't just about you and me anymore. Our boys are involved now, and I will do whatever it takes to protect them." David's expression softened as he nodded. "I know. And I want to protect them too. I'll do whatever you need me to do. Just give me a chance." The following week was a blur of damage control. David released a statement condemning the media for invading their privacy and pleading for space for his family, but the damage had already been done. Everywhere Nina went, she felt eyes on her, curious, judgmental, sympathetic. But the worst came 2 weeks later. It was a quiet Saturday afternoon. Nina was playing with the boys in the backyard when there was a knock on the front door. She frowned, wiping her hands on her jeans as she made her way to the entrance. When she opened the door, her heart sank. Standing on her porch, impeccably dressed as always, was Margaret Evans. Nina's breath caught in her throat. Margaret's icy blue eyes scanned the modest house, her lips curling in distaste. "It's true, then," Margaret said, her voice dripping with condescension. "You really did have his children." Nina's jaw tightened as she stepped forward, positioning herself protectively in front of the door. "You weren't invited here." Margaret's gaze flickered to the side, where the boys' laughter floated from the backyard. "I had to see for myself," she said, ignoring Nina's cold reception. "David has made some questionable choices, but this—" Her voice trailed off as she glanced at Nina, her disdain barely concealed. "This is more than I expected." Fury surged through Nina, but she kept her voice calm. "If you've come here to insult me and my children, you can leave now." Margaret raised an eyebrow. "I've come here to talk about my grandchildren. Whether you like it or not, they are Evans by blood, and I intend to be part of their lives." Nina's heart pounded in her chest. The nerve of this woman, showing up after all these years, pretending she had any right to be involved in her children's lives. "These boys are mine," Nina said, her voice low and dangerous. "I've raised them alone for 3 years, without a word from you or David. You don't get to walk in now and claim them just because it's convenient for you." Margaret's lips thinned. "This isn't about convenience, dear. This is about family. Blood." Nina took a step forward, her eyes blazing with anger. "Family is more than blood. And if you think for 1 second that I will let someone like you into their lives, someone who couldn't even bother to show up when they were born, you're wrong. Very wrong." For a moment, Margaret seemed taken aback by Nina's fierce protectiveness. But before she could respond, David appeared behind her, his expression tense. "Mother," he said sharply, stepping past her to stand beside Nina. "That's enough." Margaret turned to her son, her eyes narrowing. "David, I'm only trying to—" "I know exactly what you're trying to do," David interrupted, his voice firm. "But this isn't your decision. Nina is their mother, and she's the one who decides what's best for them. Not you." Nina's heart fluttered at his words, a flicker of hope sparking in her chest. Could he really be standing up for her, for them, after all this time? Margaret's face hardened, but she said nothing more. Without another word, she turned on her heel and left, her footsteps echoing down the porch steps. As the door closed behind her, the tension in the room slowly dissolved. David turned to Nina, his eyes filled with apology. "I'm sorry about her," he said quietly. "She has no right to barge in like that." Nina nodded, still shaken from the encounter. "I won't let her hurt them," she whispered. David stepped closer, his voice soft but determined. "Neither will I." Over the next few weeks, Nina and David found themselves in uncharted territory. For the first time in years, they were working together as a team for their sons. It wasn't easy. Trust was still fragile, and the wounds from their past were far from healed. But slowly things began to change. David continued to show up, not just for the boys, but for Nina too. He helped with school pickups, attended doctor's appointments, and spent long afternoons at the park with the boys, pushing them on the swings and laughing at their antics. Nina watched from a distance, her emotions conflicted. She had spent so long building a life without him, learning to be both mother and father to her sons. Now, watching David bond with the boys, she couldn't deny the connection between them. The boys adored their father, and David, to her surprise, seemed committed to being the man they deserved. One evening, after the boys had been tucked into bed, Nina and David sat on the back porch, the cool night air wrapping around them. It was the first time in a long while that they had been alone together. "I'm sorry," David said quietly, breaking the silence. "For everything. For leaving, for not being there when you needed me. I was weak, and I let fear control me." Nina stared at the night sky, her heart heavy. "You broke me, David. You left me when I was ready to give you everything." David's voice cracked. "I know. And I regret it every day. But I'm here now. I want to make it right for you, for the boys." Nina turned to look at him, her eyes filled with the pain she had carried for so long. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you." David's shoulders sagged, but he nodded. "I understand. But I'm going to keep trying. I'm not going anywhere this time." As the weeks turned into months, Nina cautiously allowed David back into their lives. It started with supervised visits, then unsupervised ones. The boys, who had once only known their father through stories, were now building memories with him. They played trucks, built forts, and shared bedtime stories. The sound of their laughter filled the house in a way that made Nina's heart swell with both joy and trepidation. But it wasn't just the boys who were reconnecting with David. Slowly, piece by piece, Nina's walls began to come down. She found herself laughing at his jokes, confiding in him about the challenges of raising 4 children alone, and sharing quiet moments like they once had. One evening, as they sat on the couch, a glass of wine in Nina's hand, David turned to her, his expression serious. "I want to be with you, Nina. I know it's not going to be easy, but I want us to be a family. For real this time." Nina's heart skipped a beat, her mind racing. Could she really trust him again? Could they really rebuild what had been broken? She took a deep breath, her voice soft but steady. "If we do this, David, there's no more running. You have to be all in for me and the boys." David nodded, his eyes filled with sincerity. "I'm all in." For the first time in years, Nina allowed herself to believe in the possibility of a future with him. It wouldn't be easy. There were still wounds to heal, trust to rebuild. But as she looked at David, she realized that maybe, just maybe, they could find their way back to each other. Together. The morning of the interview arrived with a mix of anxiety and determination. Nina stood in front of her bedroom mirror, smoothing the fabric of her dress and taking deep, steadying breaths. This wasn't just any interview, this was her chance to reclaim control of the narrative, to protect her children from the prying eyes of the world, and to finally tell her side of the story. Diane Foster, the respected journalist known for her thoughtful and humanizing interviews, had agreed to conduct the exclusive. Nina and David had chosen her because they trusted she would approach their story with care and integrity. David appeared in the doorway, adjusting his tie. "You ready for this?" he asked, his voice calm but laced with tension. "As ready as he'll ever be," Nina replied, meeting his eyes in the mirror. The journey to this moment had been filled with heartbreak, anger, and doubt. But they had come through it together, and that gave her strength. The living room had been transformed into a makeshift studio, with soft lights and cameras set up to capture the interview. The boys, dressed in matching outfits, were fidgeting with excitement in the kitchen, oblivious to the gravity of the situation. Diane smiled warmly as she greeted Nina and David, her calm demeanor instantly putting them at ease. "Thank you for trusting me with your story," she said. "I know this hasn't been easy." Nina nodded, exchanging a glance with David. "We just want to set the record straight for ourselves and for our boys." As the cameras began to roll, Diane started with gentle questions about their relationship, how they met, and the whirlwind romance that had led them to the altar. Nina and David recounted their story, choosing their words carefully. When Diane asked about the wedding day, Nina felt her throat tighten. The memories of that moment still painful. "I thought everything was perfect," Nina said softly. "I believed we were building something real. But David wasn't ready, and it broke me." David's voice cracked as he spoke next. "I was afraid. Afraid of what my family thought. Of the pressure I thought I was protecting her by walking away, but I was wrong. I've regretted it every day since." Diane nodded, her expression compassionate but professional. It wasn't just about Thompson anymore, it was about a system that had been corrupt for far too long. David paused, taking a deep breath. Seeing them for the first time, it was like everything I had been running from came crashing down on me. I knew instantly that they were mine, and I knew I had to make things right. Nina watched him, the sincerity in his voice undeniable. This was the man she had always hoped he could be, the father their sons deserved. "And how did you feel, Nina, when David re-entered your life after all that time?" Diane asked, her eyes trained on Nina. Nina took a moment to gather her thoughts, choosing her words carefully. "I was angry. I had spent 3 years raising 4 boys on my own, building a life for us. I didn't want to let him back in, but I also knew that the boys deserved to know their father. So I gave him a chance." Slowly, as they spoke, the tension in the room began to ease. The hardest parts of their story were now out in the open, and with that came a strange sense of relief. Diane shifted the conversation toward the future. "What do you hope people take away from your story?" Nina smiled, the weight lifting from her shoulders as she answered. "That love isn't always easy. It takes work, forgiveness, and second chances. But if you're willing to fight for it, it can survive." David squeezed her hand, his voice soft but firm. "And that family comes in all forms. Our boys are a miracle, and we're committed to giving them the best of both worlds, both sides of their heritage." As if on cue, a loud crash came from the kitchen, followed by the giggles of 4 little boys. Nina and David exchanged a knowing look, their serious moment interrupted by the chaos of parenthood. Diane chuckled. "It sounds like the stars of the show are ready to make their appearance." The boys were soon brought into the living room, their wide eyes staring at the cameras with a mix of curiosity and excitement. They piled onto the couch between Nina and David, each one brimming with energy. Ethan spoke first, proudly announcing, "Daddy reads us stories now," while Caleb added, "But Mama does the best voices." Diane smiled warmly at their antics. "It sounds like you all have a lot of fun together." The boys nodded enthusiastically, and Nina's heart swelled with love. Despite everything they had been through, this was what mattered most. As the interview wrapped up, Diane asked one final question. "What does the future hold for your family?" Nina looked at David, a small smile playing on her lips. "We're excited for the future. We know there will be challenges, but we're facing them together, as a family." David nodded, his eyes filled with hope. "We've come a long way, and I know we'll keep moving forward." The cameras turned off, and the crew began packing up their equipment. Nina let out a long breath, feeling lighter than she had in months. The interview had been hard, but it had also been freeing. They had told their story on their own terms, and now they could move forward. The weeks following the interview were a whirlwind of media attention. Most of the coverage was positive, praising Nina and David for their honesty and their efforts to raise their sons in a loving, blended family. However, there were still harsh critics, comments filled with judgment, racist undertones, and cruel assumptions. Nina tried to shield the boys from the worst of it, but it weighed on her. She had worked so hard to build a life where they could thrive, and now their privacy had been invaded in ways she hadn't fully anticipated. One afternoon, as she was scrolling through an article online, tears of frustration welled up in her eyes. Why couldn't people just let them live in peace? A small hand touched her knee, and she looked down to see Liam standing beside her, his big brown eyes filled with concern. "Mama, why are you sad?" he asked softly. Nina quickly wiped her eyes, pulling her youngest son onto her lap. "I'm not sad, baby. Just a little tired." Liam studied her face for a moment before wrapping his arms around her neck. "I love you, Mama." In that moment, all the noise, the judgment, the media storm faded away. This was what mattered: the unconditional love of her children, the family they had built together. Over the next few weeks, life began to settle into a new normal. David's presence in their lives became a source of comfort rather than tension. He continued to show up, not just for the boys, but for Nina as well. Slowly, she began to let her guard down, allowing herself to trust him again. One evening, after the boys were tucked into bed, David turned to her, his eyes soft and full of emotion. "I love you, Nina." The words caught her off guard. She had spent so long guarding her heart, afraid to let herself believe in him again. But as she looked into his eyes, she realized that she had already started to fall back in love with him. Slowly, carefully, but surely. "I love you too," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. David smiled, pulling her close. I've been waiting to hear that for a long time." As they stood there, wrapped in each other's arms, Nina felt a sense of peace she hadn't felt in years. They had been through hell and back, but they had come out stronger on the other side. Together. Months passed, and the boys continued to grow and thrive. Ethan was emerging as the leader of the group, always the first to take charge during playtime. Caleb, the quiet observer, was the artist, spending hours drawing elaborate pictures of his family. Noah, the joker, loved to make everyone laugh, while Liam, the baby of the group, was their protector, always quick to comfort his brothers when they were upset. Nina watched them with pride, marveling at how far they had come. She had built a life for them, one filled with love, stability, and now a family united. But the most unexpected change came when David's parents, Margaret and William Evans, slowly began to reach out. Margaret, who had once been cold and dismissive, started making small efforts to be involved in the boys' lives. It wasn't an easy process, and Nina remained wary. But she could see the genuine remorse in Margaret's eyes. One afternoon, Margaret showed up at their home unannounced. Nina's initial reaction was to turn her away, but something about the older woman's demeanor stopped her. "I owe you an apology," Margaret said, her voice quiet but firm. "I was wrong. About everything. These boys, they're my grandchildren, and I've wasted so much time being blinded by my own prejudices. Can we start over?" Nina hesitated, the weight of the past still heavy on her shoulders. But as she looked at Margaret, she saw not the judgmental woman from before, but a grandmother who had finally realized what she had lost. "We can try," Nina said softly, "but it's going to take time." Margaret nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "Thank you." As the weeks went on, both Margaret and William made more efforts to be involved in their grandchildren's lives. It was a slow process, but the boys adored having their grandparents around. And Nina began to see that maybe, just maybe, they could heal as a family. On a warm spring day, Nina and David gathered their family and closest friends for a celebration. It wasn't just any celebration, though it was their wedding day. This time it was different. It wasn't about appearances or meeting expectations. It was about love, real, messy, hard-earned love. The boys served as the ring-bearers, each one proudly walking down the aisle with matching smiles. Nina stood at the altar, her heart racing, but this time it wasn't with fear. It was with joy. She had come full circle stronger, wiser, and more certain than ever that this was where she belonged. As she and David exchanged vows, surrounded by the people who had supported them through the toughest times, Nina felt a deep sense of peace. They had been through hell and back, but they had made it. Do you, Nina Harper, take David Evans to be your husband, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health? Nina smiled, her eyes shining with tears of happiness. "I do." "And do you, David Evans, take Nina Harper to be your wife, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health?" David's voice was steady as he replied, "I do." With that, they sealed their vows with a kiss, their sons cheering in the background. As they danced at the reception, David pulled Nina close, his voice soft in her ear. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" Nina smiled, resting her head on his chest. "We have, and I wouldn't change a thing." As the evening wore on, Nina watched as their family danced and laughed together. Margaret and William smiled at their grandsons. Sam twirled Caleb around the dance floor, and the boys chased fireflies under the stars. Nina felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude wash over her. This was her family, imperfect, but perfect in its own way. They had faced challenges, heartbreak, and judgment, but they had come through it stronger. And as they looked toward the future, Nina knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. Because love in all its forms was worth fighting for. 5 years later, Nina and David sat in the audience at River Oaks Elementary School, watching proudly as their quadruplets participated in their second-grade talent show. Ethan recited a poem he had written, Caleb showed off his latest painting, Noah performed a magic trick that had the crowd laughing, and Liam played a simple tune on the piano. As they watched their sons take their final bow, Nina felt David squeeze her hand. She looked over at him, tears of pride welling in her eyes. "Can you believe how far we've come?" David whispered. Nina smiled, leaning her head on his shoulder. "It's been quite a journey." Their family had grown stronger, their bond deeper. Nina had become a respected partner at her law firm, specializing in family law and civil rights. David's nonprofit organization, focused on supporting single parents and promoting racial understanding, had gained national recognition. But their greatest achievement wasn't in their careers. It was the loving, stable home they had created for their sons. They had learned that love wasn't always easy, but it was always worth fighting for. As they gathered their boys after the show, Nina noticed one of the teachers approaching. "Mrs. Evans, Mr. Evans," she said, her expression warm. "I just wanted to tell you that your boys are a joy to have in class. They're kind, compassionate, and so proud of their family. You've done a wonderful job raising them." Nina's heart swelled with pride as she thanked the teacher. She had faced so many doubts and fears along the way, but moments like this reminded her that every challenge had been worth it. "But the officers were following protocol," correct, Lisa pressed. "They had built a life together that she hadn't dared to dream of all those years ago." And as they looked to the future, Nina knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them with the same love, strength, and determination that had brought them to this moment. Together! If you've enjoyed this story of resilience, love, and family, make sure to hit that subscribe button and stay tuned for more incredible stories that will inspire and uplift you. Don't forget to like and share this video with others who could use a little reminder that love, no matter how complicated, is always worth fighting for. Thanks for watching, and well, see you in the next one. So, you felt disrespected. But would you agree that the officers had a responsibility to ensure that the system wasn't being abused? "We have a rich history here in Silver Creek," Mayor Parker began, addressing the gathered crowd. She knew what Lisa was doing, trying to twist the narrative, trying to make it seem like the officers had been reasonable. "They had a responsibility to treat me like a human being," Alyssa said, her voice shaking. "But they didn't." Lisa Harding's smile faltered slightly, and she stepped back. No further questions. As Alyssa stepped down from the stand, her legs felt weak. She had spoken her truth, but she wasn't sure if it would be enough. The trial stretched on for several more days, with both sides presenting their arguments. Samuel continued to build a strong case, highlighting the officers' failure to follow proper procedures and the emotional toll the incident had taken on Alyssa and her family. But Lisa Harding and the defense fought back just as hard, trying to paint the officers as professionals simply doing their jobs. By the time the closing statements were made, Alyssa felt emotionally drained. She sat beside Ethan, holding his hand tightly as the judge prepared to deliver the verdict. The room was silent as the judge spoke. After reviewing the evidence and the testimonies provided, it is clear that the officers involved acted inappropriately in their handling of Mrs. Grant's situation. This court finds in favor of the plaintiff. Alyssa's heart skipped a beat as the words sank in. They had won, but the judge's next words tempered her relief. However, while the court recognizes the distress caused, the damages awarded will be limited, as the defense has shown that there was no intent to cause harm. Alyssa exhaled slowly, her emotions a mixture of relief and disappointment. They had won, but it wasn't the complete victory she had hoped for. As the courtroom emptied, Samuel approached Alyssa and Ethan. "We did it," he said with a small smile. "It's not everything we wanted, but it's a step in the right direction." Alyssa nodded, her heart still heavy. She had hoped for more accountability, more justice. But as she looked around at the people who had supported her, she realized that the fight wasn't over. This was just the beginning. Ethan squeezed her hand. "We're going to keep pushing. This isn't the end." Alyssa smiled faintly, feeling a renewed sense of determination. "No, it's not," she agreed. "We've come this far, and we're not stopping now." The days following the trial were a whirlwind of mixed emotions for Alyssa and Ethan. They had won the case, but the limited damages awarded felt like a hollow victory. The media portrayed it as a triumph, but for Alyssa, there was a lingering sense of unfinished business. The police department issued a short statement acknowledging the court's decision, but refused to accept any direct blame. There was no public apology, no disciplinary actions against the officers involved, just silence, as if the whole ordeal was something they wanted to forget. Ethan tried to stay positive, constantly reminding Alyssa of the progress they had made. "We forced them to acknowledge their mistake," he said one evening, as they sat together in the living room. "That's something." Alyssa nodded, but her heart was heavy. "It doesn't feel like enough," she admitted. "We went through all of that, and they still get to walk away like it didn't matter." Ethan placed a hand on her shoulder. "It mattered. It mattered to the people who saw what happened, the people who are standing with us now. This is bigger than just one case." Alyssa knew he was right. The outpouring of support from the community had been overwhelming. Messages of encouragement flooded her social media, and people she had never met reached out to thank her for standing up against injustice. Tanya, who had been a constant source of support throughout the ordeal, visited them often. "We've opened the door for change," she said during one of her visits. "The fight isn't over, but you've made people listen." Still, the weight of what they had been through lingered. Alyssa felt exhausted, both physically and emotionally. She hadn't fully processed the toll the trial had taken on her, and the public scrutiny that followed didn't help. There were still hateful comments online, people who insisted that she had overreacted, that she was trying to make something out of nothing. But Alyssa refused to let the negativity silence her. She had come too far to back down now. A few weeks after the trial, Samuel Green contacted Alyssa and Ethan with some surprising news. A civil rights organization had taken notice of their case and wanted to partner with them in pushing for broader reform. They were calling for changes in police training, particularly around how officers handle interactions with people of color and those with disabilities. "We're going to push for systemic changes," Samuel explained during their meeting. The lawsuit was just the first step. Now we need to focus on changing the policies that allow things like this to happen in the first place. Alyssa felt a flicker of hope. This was exactly what she had wanted, the chance to prevent others from going through what she had experienced. Tanya was equally enthusiastic. "Well, organize another rally," she said, her eyes alight with determination. "This time, we're not just demanding justice for you. We're demanding changes that will protect everyone." The rally, held in front of the courthouse, drew even larger crowds than the first one. Alyssa stood at the center of it all, feeling the energy of the people around her, people who believed in what she was fighting for, people who wanted to see real change. This time, Alyssa felt stronger. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for the countless others who had been silenced, ignored, and mistreated. As she took the stage to speak, the crowd quieted. Alyssa's voice rang out clear and steady. "I stood here months ago to tell you my story. Today, I'm here to tell you that the fight for justice isn't over. It's not just about what happened to me. It's about what happens every day to people who look like me, people who live with disabilities, people who are treated like they don't belong." The crowd cheered, their voices rising in support. "We deserve to be treated with dignity and respect, no matter who we are or where we come from," Alyssa continued. "And we won't stop until the system changes, until officers are held accountable, until our communities feel safe, and until everyone is seen for who they are, not just the assumptions made about them." As the rally continued, Alyssa felt a renewed sense of purpose. She knew there was still a long road ahead, but she also knew she wasn't walking it alone. In the months that followed, Alyssa and Ethan's lives slowly began to return to a sense of normalcy. The media attention faded, and the constant pressure of the trial eased. But Alyssa's fight for justice didn't end, it simply shifted. She and Ethan became advocates, speaking at events, partnering with civil rights organizations, and working with local lawmakers to push for reforms in police training. Their case became a touchstone for broader conversations about race, disability, and the treatment of marginalized communities. For Alyssa, the most important change was within herself. She had gone from feeling powerless to finding her voice, and now she was using that voice to help others. Her strength, which had been tested in ways she never imagined, had only grown stronger. One evening, as Alyssa and Ethan sat on the porch watching Marcus play in the yard, she felt a sense of peace that had eluded her for so long. "I didn't think we'd get here," Alyssa said quietly, leaning her head against Ethan's shoulder. Ethan smiled, wrapping his arm around her. "We've come a long way." Alyssa watched Marcus laugh and run, her heart swelling with love for him. "Do you think he'll remember what happened?" she asked softly. Ethan thought for a moment. "Maybe. But if he does, he'll remember how strong you were, how you stood up for yourself and for him." Alyssa smiled, wiping a tear from her cheek. "I just want him to know that we did the right thing." "He knows," Ethan said gently. "We all know." Months turned into a year, and while the initial urgency of the trial had passed, the changes that Alyssa and Ethan had fought for were starting to take root. The police department, under pressure from the public and local leaders, began implementing new training protocols. Officers were required to undergo sensitivity training focused on racial bias and disability awareness. It wasn't a complete overhaul, but it was a step in the right direction. Alyssa and Ethan continued to speak out, using their platform to raise awareness and push for further reforms. They met with other families who had experienced similar injustices, offering support and guidance. One day, as Alyssa was preparing for another speaking event, she received an unexpected call from the police department's new chief, who had been brought in after the fallout from the trial. "I wanted to reach out to you personally," the chief said, his tone respectful. "I know the department has a long way to go, but I want you to know that we're committed to making things better. What happened to you should never have happened, and we're working to ensure it doesn't happen again." Alyssa was taken aback by the call. It wasn't a formal apology, but it was the closest thing to acknowledgement she had received from the department since the trial. "Thank you," Alyssa replied, her voice steady. "I appreciate that. But I'll be watching closely to make sure those changes happen." The chief chuckled lightly. "I wouldn't expect anything less." As Alyssa hung up the phone, she felt a sense of closure that had been missing for so long. The journey wasn't over, but for the first time, she felt like real progress was being made. On a crisp autumn afternoon, Alyssa, Ethan, and Marcus returned to Greenview Amusement Park. It had been over a year since the confrontation, and though Alyssa had been reluctant to return, Ethan had convinced her that it was time to reclaim the space that had once brought them so much pain. As they walked through the gates, Alyssa felt a mix of emotions. Memories of that day flooded her mind, but alongside them came a sense of strength. She had faced her fear, fought for justice, and emerged stronger on the other side. "Mom, can we go on the Ferris wheel?" Marcus asked, his voice filled with excitement. Alyssa smiled down at him, her heart swelling with pride. "Of course we can," she said. "Let's go." As they approached the ride, Alyssa noticed the park had made some changes. The accessibility lines were more clearly marked, and staff members greeted them with warmth and respect. It was a small but significant Victoria sign that slowly but surely things were changing. As the Ferris wheel lifted them into the sky, Alyssa looked out over the park, the sun casting a warm glow over the landscape. She glanced at Ethan, who smiled back at her, and then at Marcus, whose laughter filled the air. In that moment, Alyssa felt a deep sense of peace. She had fought for herself, for her family, and for justice. And while the fight was far from over, she knew they were heading in the right direction. They had faced the odds and emerged stronger, and now, together, they looked to the future with hope. The story of Alyssa and Ethan's fight for justice became a symbol of hope and resilience. It wasn't just about one incident, it was about standing up against a system that too often overlooked the people it was meant to protect. Their story inspired others to come forward, to share their own experiences, and to demand better from the institutions that were supposed to serve them. Alyssa's journey wasn't easy, but in the end, she had found her strength not just for herself, but for her family and her community. And while the fight for justice continued, Alyssa knew that together they could make a difference. Thank you for watching this powerful story. If Alyssa's journey for justice and resilience inspired you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories that spark hope and bring light to issues that matter. Hit the notification bell so you won't miss our next upload, and let us know your thoughts in the comments. Your voice matters in the ongoing fight for change. Stay tuned for more stories that uplift, inspire, and push for a better tomorrow. He paused, locking eyes with the jury. We have a chance today to show that Silver Creek is a place where everyone is valued, where justice prevails. Let's not waste that chance. The jury's decision, when it came, was a victory for Ethan's client and for the town as a whole. The verdict sent a clear message: Silver Creek was ready to move forward, to embrace the values of equality and justice that Ethan and Nia had fought so hard for. The victory in the courtroom marked the beginning of a new chapter for Silver Creek. Slowly but surely, the town was becoming a place where people felt safe to speak out, to stand up for what they believed in. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments of tension, still pockets of resistance, but the progress was undeniable. Ethan and Nia, though still facing challenges, felt a sense of peace they hadn't known in a long time. They had fought for their love, for justice, and for the future of Silver Creek, and now they were seeing the fruits of their labor. One evening, as they sat together on their porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Ethan turned to Nia, a soft smile on his lips. "You know," he said, his voice filled with affection, "when I first met you, I had no idea how much my life would change." Nia chuckled, resting her head on his shoulder. "You had no idea how much you'd change mine." Ethan wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. "We've come so far. Sometimes I still can't believe everything we've been through." Nia nodded, her heart full. "It hasn't been easy, but I wouldn't trade it for anything." As they sat together, the quiet of the evening surrounding them, Nia thought about the journey they had been on, the battles they had fought, the love they had shared, and the future they had helped create. Silver Creek was changing, and so were they. A few weeks later, the community held a town-wide celebration to honor the progress that had been made. The event, organized by Nia and Martha Sullivan, was a way to bring everyone together, to celebrate the town's journey toward inclusion and justice. The celebration was held in the town square, where people from all walks of life gathered, young and old, black and white, conservative and progressive. It was a symbol of how far Silver Creek had come, and a reminder that the town's future was something everyone could help shape. As the sun set over the square, Ethan and Nia stood together on the main stage, looking out at the crowd. The atmosphere was warm and joyful, filled with laughter and music. It was a moment of triumph, a testament to the power of love, community, and perseverance. Martha Sullivan took the microphone, her voice carrying across the square. "Tonight, we're celebrating more than just the progress we've made. We're celebrating the people who made that progress possible. People like Ethan and Nia, who showed us what it means to stand up for what's right, even when it's hard." The crowd erupted in applause, and Nia felt tears prick the corners of her eyes. She hadn't done this for recognition, but hearing the town come together in support of the changes they had fought for filled her with a sense of pride and fulfillment. As the night wore on, Ethan and Nia danced together under the stars, surrounded by friends, family, and neighbors. The future, once uncertain, now felt bright with possibility. And though there were still challenges ahead, they knew they would face them together, just as they always had. As the years passed, Silver Creek continued to evolve, becoming a beacon of hope for other towns grappling with the same struggles. Ethan and Nia's love story became part of the town's legacy, a symbol of what could be achieved when people refused to back down in the face of adversity. Their journey wasn't just about love, it was about standing up for justice, for fairness, and for the belief that everyone, no matter their background, deserved to be treated with dignity and respect. In the end, Silver Creek had become a place where people from all walks of life could live, love, and grow. And though the road had been long and hard, it had been worth every step. Ethan and Nia, together, had built a legacy of love and hope, one that would endure for generations to come. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more about love, justice, and the power of standing up for what's right, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications. By subscribing, you'll stay updated on all our latest content. Thanks for your support, And remember, love and justice always prevail. He stood up and walked over to the window, looking out at the world beyond. The sunlight filtered through the trees, casting long shadows across the yard. It was a beautiful day, full of possibility. And as Derek looked out, he felt a deep sense of hope for the future, not just for himself and his family, but for the world they were all helping to shape. Mia and Marcus ran into the room, their laughter filling the air as they played a game of tag around the furniture. Jessica followed close behind, her smile bright and warm. Derek turned away from the window and watched his family, feeling a deep sense of contentment. They were his reason for everything, for standing tall in the face of adversity, for sharing his story, for doing his part to make the world a better place. And as he looked at their faces, full of love and laughter, Derek knew that the future was bright. It wouldn't always be easy, but it was full of potential, full of opportunities to learn, to grow, and to create a world where empathy and understanding prevailed. In the end, that was all he could ask for. As the day wound down, Derek sat back at his desk, reflecting on everything that had transpired over the last few months. From the confrontation at the electronics store to the inspiring conversations with young people, he had witnessed firsthand how one small action could create lasting change. Every step forward mattered. He logged into his blog and drafted another post, this time focusing on the idea of speaking out, of standing up for what's right. He knew there was more work to do, always more people to reach, more stories to tell. But he felt confident that he was on the right path. As Derek prepared to hit publish, he paused, thinking of everyone who had been following his journey. If you've been inspired by this story and want to be part of a community that stands up for empathy, justice, and change, don't forget to subscribe to the blog. Join the conversation, share your thoughts, and stay tuned for more stories about making a difference one step at a time. Together we can build a future that's brighter for everyone. Satisfied, Derek hit the publish button and leaned back in his chair. The work wasn't done, but with every new subscriber, every person who read and connected with his message, he knew they were getting closer to the world they all deserved. And that was worth everything.